Welcome to the Skilled Podcast from Growth Space, the place where we share stories and strategies from leaders who've turned growth and development into a competitive advantage. Our host is Omer Glass, co-founder and CEO at Growth Space. We're also hosted by Elissa Mahendra, executive advisor and HR transformation and talent leader, and founder of the Human ROI. Let's dig in.
Welcome to the Skilled Podcast, stories and strategies from leaders who have turned growth and development into a competitive advantage. Today, I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Marci Paino, Chief Learning Officer at Cisco. Welcome, Marci.
Thanks for having me.
You know, Marci, you've spent your career learning and development, kind of growing up through that space, and you've done it at massive scale. You've done it at American Express, Accenture, Western Digital, and now Cisco. You're leading L&D for over 86,000 people and one of the most AI-forward companies in the world. We'd love to hear your origin story and a little bit about the path that set you to where you are today.
Thanks. Yeah. So my career is exactly as you summarized it. I grew up in the L&D space. So I was very lucky to find early in my life what my passion and my purpose was. And I changed my major in undergrad to politics, from politics to organizational communication, learning, and design, and then went straight to grad school and studied educational technology and IO psych and performance consulting. I entered into the workforce as a practitioner. I did instructional design, and then I went into consulting. And I had the pleasure of kind of working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies through that consulting experience. And I went back in-house with American Express, as you mentioned, and I was a business architect and then the director of learning and innovation. And from there, I went into Western Digital. I kind of expanded my scope and my remit to really be about talent development and talent management. And so really looked at kind of the end-to-end career experience from hire to retire, and how do we create a more modern experience for employees to navigate. And then worked my way up. I was the head of people development and engagement at Western Digital. And then I left to come over here to Cisco as the chief learning officer. And so Cisco is on a transformation journey. And so we really are looking at how do we make sure that we are staying at the forefront of AI. And we know that learning is a business imperative at the center of all of that. We know that our ability to adapt and adjust and be agile and learn the newest skills as they continue to kind of atrophy very quickly is at the core of us in our business success. And so I wear two hats. One is really looking at how do we drive learning transformation and driving kind of a culture of learning here at Cisco. And then in addition to that, I also lead our AI Workforce Consortium, which is a coalition of 11 tech leading companies that have come together to study the impact of AI on the workforce and then release the research that we're doing alongside scalable frameworks and best practices and learning resources that we've curated across all of our businesses to make sure that we are helping the world around us really securely, responsibly, and ethically adopt AI.
You know, Marci, you talked about the AI Workforce Consortium. And as I learned more about it, I thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity, because so many organizations today have a mandate to implement AI, right? 78%. Yet 80% of those companies, it was cited, are not getting the return on their investment. So I'd love to have you share more about the consortium. You know, what does it mean to take a problem you're solving inside Cisco and bring it to the whole industry? And what is the consortium actually producing that no single company could? You know, and that's massive scalable impact around the initiative.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about it.
That's a great question. I think the end there is really important. I think we believe that the power of the collective for us coming together to really discuss the challenges that we're all facing and the best practices, what's working, what isn't, and then be able to then turn and publish that to the rest of the workforce that may not have the same resources as us or may not be at the same pace as us. We see that collective power as being kind of industry game changing. So I'll take a step back and I'll just share that the consortium is, I mentioned, comprised of 11 companies. That includes Accenture, ourselves, Cisco, of course, Cornerstone, Eightfold, Google, IBM, Indeed, Intel, Microsoft, Pearson, and SAP. So I just wanted to make sure that I kind of called out the collective that has come together. You can see that we have tech leaders and we have technology providers, but we also have really powerful data by way of Indeed, Eightfold, and Cornerstone. And so we are able to study the labor market trends and themes that we're seeing around skills. And so we have studied the top 50 in-demand ICT roles and the specialized support roles that really help drive AI adoption. And so what we saw through our reports are the first one that came out in 2024 was that we predicted about 92% of those roles would see a moderate to high level of transformation because of AI. And then a year later, our study showed that actually over 72% of the job postings are now requiring foundational AI skills as part of them. So we're seeing it rapidly come to life for us. So we basically study these insights and then we put together frameworks that we then publish on our microsite. And so we have not only the research, but we have a skills glossary. So we have come up with a common way to define the skills that we need to develop across our companies and what we believe those foundational skills are. And then we have learning recommendations mapped to all of those skills. And so there's over 200 learning recommendations powered by all of our companies that are available, and over 85% of them are freely available to the public. So you can search the catalog, find them by skill, find them by job role, et cetera. We also published an AI workforce playbook. And within the playbook, we talk about different best practices and frameworks that organizations can put into practice. Things like, how do you create persona-based learning that is anchored in the skills that people need to be able to develop? How do you think about workforce planning when you're trying to grapple with how do you kind of think about your workflows and what can you automate versus augment? And where do you really need to develop your humans so that they can be in the lead of AI and AI orchestration?
I just have to take a breath after that because so many organizations are doing things around AI, but not really doing it to the level you're describing and really embedding repeatable frameworks into operationalizing it into the business, looking at workflow and job redesign, because oftentimes those things are skipped because we're trying to move too quickly. So I'm really excited to follow along on the consortium and what you're doing there. Something you mentioned in that was the move to skills first enablement. And, you and I and Omer have all grown up in learning and development, and we've seen the move and the different strategic choices, frankly, of moving to role-based training, which often comes with training curriculums or catalogs, to the skills first enablement. And you've made that strategic decision to move in that direction. You've also talked about needing skill at the speed of innovation. So what does that look like in practice as you've done that in your organization at such a large scale?
Yeah, I'll start kind of with the reason behind why skill first over roles based. So what we're seeing is that the pace at which the skills that people need to develop is so rapidly changing that the job titles just simply aren't keeping pace. And I like to use myself as an example because I am the Chief Learning Officer at Cisco, and my title in Workday is VP People and Communities. The head of compensation is also a VP People and Communities. And so if we were to anchor our learning strategies simply around those job titles, we would be producing very generic learning experiences that would not be fit for purpose for each individual's unique needs based off of the experience and expertise that they bring to the table, but also for the role that they need to show up for every day. And I think that same analogy can apply across the board, even with like software engineers, right? So like the context in which you need to apply your skills is going to be different based off of where you sit in the business. And so if we can get our intelligence down to kind of the skill particle base, then we can then create more personalized learning experiences at scale. And so that has been really kind of at the core of our strategy as we think about that.
What you're saying is interesting because I understand the learning piece, which is essential, but the other side of the coin is actually basically making roles almost irrelevant to promotions, right? So you can basically everyone, if they have the right skills, can do anything, right, at the company. Now, I'm a big believer. I just promoted, like I'm announcing it on a Monday, a very senior position internally, someone who had no experience in this field, right? I'm talking about someone coming from another function, to lead basically another function. Why? Because I think a lot of strategy and wisdom is required, and this person has it. I think it's very interesting. How do you do it at scale? Because basically everything shuffles, then it just becomes much harder, because it's much easier just to hire someone who did the same, like, to hire a CLO who did five Fortune 5 CLO, it's much easier than to hire an engineer to do a CLO job, for example. So how do you go about it at scale?
Yeah, so you brought up a great use case. So at the core of our strategy is building out Cisco Skills Intelligence. And this is a quantum model that is pulling in external labor market data and combining it with our internal data so that we can basically understand what is our skill supply. So what skills do we have within our workforce? What is our skill demand? So what do we need based off of the mapping that we've done? And then what are we forecasting? So what are the trends and themes that we're seeing come up? And then how do we create learning strategies that address the insights that we're getting from that? A key output from that intelligence allows us to see where are there skill adjacencies, transferable skills, or what we consider bridge skills, which are skills that are kind of indicative of, hey, if you have this skill, we think it'll be easy for you to learn this skill over here. And once you have that level of analytics at scale, it's easy for you to see across your workforce where your talent is and where you might be able to give them experiences to grow into the roles of the future. And so part of when you kind of talk about skilling at the speed of innovation, core to our strategy is what we consider the skills flywheel. So once we have our skills intelligence built out, we then have skill signals, right? And you can kind of think about it as like a ping. And the skill signal might ping us as a learning organization and say, hey, we see this coming about. We are going to have to develop a learning experience around this. Or it might ping what we call our pace setter network. And the pace setters are those that are sort of the high activated, high performers, have deep expertise in core areas. And so then we can then collect their intelligence and their knowledge and their expertise and put it into our content engine that then allows us to feed that into the design of our learning experiences. And it takes our production from 3 months down to a week, basically, because we're able to collect the subject matter expertise using agentic AI orchestration at the center of that strategy. And that really is kind of the back engine that we set up to allow for us to produce learning at the speed of innovation. And so that's sort of the learning side of it. And then the skills intelligence also feeds the workforce planning side of it. So as we think about workforce planning and workforce movement, when you think, we use this B framework, right? Is it a build, boost, borrow, or buy? So we're very focused on the boost and the build. And so we kind of define the boost as like, hey, we see these targeted areas of employees who have those skills that are adjacent, transferable, or bridge. So we can give them targeted development that is very dynamic in nature and fit for purpose for them to get them to be able to move into the positions we need them to. But then there's the general build, right? And we know we need to build our workforce every day, always on modern learning, right? That's kind of at the core of our strategy. And so that's sort of that's the core of what we're doing in the learning space. And then that skills intelligence can also help us inform what do we bot, which means automate, and then what do we look at from a borrow and a buy perspective. So do we want to look at key talent movements? Do we want to enable stretch assignments? Do we want to enable apprenticeships? Thinking about that as a strategic lever for talent mobility is also just as important to us.
You're basically moving away from the more traditional kind of like programmatic approach where we have cohorts and this is the development that they're getting. I'm just curious, like, how do you go about this transition? You mentioned agents specifically who deliver it after subject matter experts, right? And I saw it in other very big companies, but you're basically talking about the more enablement in the flow of work, right? I need this thing in order to do my job better. I will get it now, and I would not wait for your biannual leadership training, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like to think about it as a spectrum. So the ecosystem that we're building allows us to push what we believe as a company is most important right now so that we can still do that formal programming as we need it. And we know we will. We need it from, compliance and ethics, those core things that leadership development is a great example. We know there are key moments in a person's leadership journey that they need to have a formal experience that doesn't go away. But the experience itself is completely different now, right? It is simulation based, it's experiential, it's taking case studies and unpacking them as cohorts, but cohorts that live across the globe so that you're learning with and from each other from different functions, different cultures, different ways of thinking. And it really kind of allows you to accelerate the leadership development. So that's us kind of pushing, right? But then this in the flow of work is pull. So it's when you need it, where you need it, and really allowing you to create more of a dynamic experience. And so one of the things that we're kind of actively building right now is this dynamic learning experience that allows you as an employee to build the skills really in a like a hyper personalized way, meaning that you go in and kind of how you interact with it, it adjusts and changes based off of your knowledge and expertise. So if you already have kind of baseline knowledge, you move on, you can test yourself, you can reflect, you can do simulations, you can move from, podcast to reading into video, right? And so that is all powered through agentic AI, and the orchestration behind the scenes is kind of this whole ecosystem that we're architecting that is a combination of, data, knowledge graph, learning platforms, and then of course our own collaboration tools internally. It all has to talk to each other in order for us to really build out that intelligence.
I love that because what you're describing, right, is the things we grew up learning about the 70-20-10 model, right? And the experiential piece versus the formal classroom piece. And you've kind of created a culture whereby development becomes a daily habit, not an annual event, right? We've talked a little bit about that already, but can you describe what that always on learning looks like at Cisco and thinking about the context of the culture, the volume, the pace of change in the organization, how AI is disrupting the way we all work, and continuous learning feels really important right now. So what's required culturally, technologically to make that model work?
Yeah, it starts with culture. I think that's where we've really started our transformation journey. And so we redefined our company's guiding principles, really spending a lot of time listening to our employees, interviewing our ELT members, scanning and studying the market and kind of what are high performing businesses doing and how are people really, or how are companies really thinking about how we need to evolve in this AI era. And so we truly believe that we need to kind of reimagine and pioneer new ways of leading, learning, and working. And that is at the core of this culture transformation. And so we define new guiding principles. They are think really big, play to win, and drive durable growth. And underneath them, what we did was we defined skills. And so essentially, you've got kind of the mindsets, which are those three big things, and then the skill sets. And there are 4 skills that we've prioritized under each one of those guiding principles. And those are the skills that we anchor our leadership development programming around. And then you have the habits, and that is how do we really think about the ways that we can reinforce learning as an ongoing drumbeat. And so we've kind of applied this marketing model of the sing, shout, and so that it's always on. So you've got this hum that's always on. You can always go to what we call Skill Studio. You can always pull what you need when you need it from the library. But then we started to look at our operating model and how are different ways that we can reinforce it. And so we've reinforced through company motions that are always happening. So we have monthly company all hands, we have monthly leader check-ins, we integrate the learning into those motions. We've also introduced a quarterly learning labs series where we have a leader lab, an employee lab, and a team lab. And it's a 3-part connected experience that helps us really focus on what's most important to the company each quarter. We're pilot testing right now with 2 of our organizations, and we're going to be rolling it out soon here to the entire company, this concept of time to grow. And so we have at Cisco time to give, which is a set of time where you can go give back to the community, you can volunteer. And so we thought, we believe so deeply in learning and growth, just like we do in giving back to the community. How might we take that concept and apply it to learning? And so we did a lot of benchmarking and studying of sort of when do people learn the best? How do they learn the best? How can we build something that would be integrated into our company's culture? And so what it is a 4-hour time block once a month that the entire company, it has a calendar block and your time to focus on learning. And so what we've done is we've built out some experiences, like a prompt experience, to help you really think, how am I going to use my 4 hours this month? We've also set up little toolkits so that if you want to do intact team learning, you can do that. There's team labs, but there's also a lot of organic growth happening around, hey, we want to learn cursor. So we got cursor corner, right? And so teams can come together to learn with and from each other, which is really meaningful and impactful. But this is a motion that is kind of supported by our executive leadership team. And so as we think about kind of our success factors, having the executive sponsorship and the leader role modeling are just as important to the culture transformation. And we see that in our research and our studies as well. So we see within AI, for example, that leaders that are using AI, that their teams are 2 times likely to be using AI. And that same principle applies to learning. If leaders are learning, their employees are more likely to be learning. And we're seeing that already in our early insights from our Time to Grow pilot. So we are seeing that kind of, we call it a leader uplift, right? And so that is very important to us. We also think the executive sponsorship is important. It's important for our ELT to continue to reinforce why this is important and that this is not something that you have to find time for, that this is a core job responsibility. And I think that's kind of key, that a lot of people kind of grapple with, how am I going to find time? But it's also, if we are sort of emphasizing, no, this is an expectation that as part of your job, you have to learn, you have to be upskilling and reskilling all the time, then that's reinforced through our, performance programs and all of that. So those are kind of like at the core of the culture transformation, and it's big and it's a lot, as you can imagine, a global company like ours. And then from a technology perspective, I kind of mentioned that skills intelligence is that quantum model that powers up our learning platform. And then we hook into our company-wide AI infrastructure. And so we have our own Cisco chat. And so we are integrated into that. So if you go to the chat, you can ask for learning recommendations based off of your chat there. And we continue to evolve and improve on that front experience. We've been doing a lot in partnership with Cornerstone in their workforce AI product and really kind of co-innovating. What are the different agentic AI experiences that we need to bring to our workforce? And how do we start to experiment with them so that we can pilot test and see what resonates and what's meeting the business needs versus what isn't, and then adjusting and adapting based off of that, which is also kind of a core principle for us as we think about our company and our culture. We need to embrace experimentation and that mentality of failing fast to learn faster. And that is at the kind of core of our guiding principles and kind of what we reinforce through all that we put out there.
It's interesting because you're talking about a lot of things that you're doing, and there's so much emphasis on skills. I think you're the first one I'm meeting who actually connected their values to specific skills, right? Because usually values are vague, just making values that are not vague, that you understand what they actually mean and they're not super fluff is one thing, but actually connecting, like, I don't know, think big, play to win, to really specific skills that you need to be better just makes it much more tangible, because values are what you expect from your employees, right? And so I'm just curious, like, how did it go about? Like, where did the focus on skills come from? It's like, what happened at Cisco specifically? Because I think, again, we're interviewing a lot of Fortune 500 learning leaders, but I don't think I ever heard the skills and values connected to skills and everything in such magnitude, basically. So where does it come from? It's coming from the board, from ELT, from the CEO, like from yourself. What's the reason?
I mean, it did come kind of from kind of the leadership team that worked on defining the guiding principles. Because to your point, the company did have values, right? And it was sort of like, okay, that's a pretty slide on the intranet, right? And like that was, you know what I mean? That was sort of the sentiment around it. And so there was a lot of questioning around, okay, you're redefining the guiding principles. What makes this different this time? And, part of the, me personally coming in as the chief learning officer, part of the premise of skills is that is an actionable, demonstratable thing that I can develop and that I can work on. And that makes the kind of abstract more tangible, right? And so that was really critical to us in like, this is what's different. Like, not only are we going to define skills, but we're going to have a learning anchored to those skills. And then when we go to do our quarterly learning labs, we are emphasizing, we have a theme, right? Like our theme might be play to win. And so then we're talking about what does it mean to play to win, and how do we build, a team of trust, and building on the skills of that we've defined underneath that particular guiding principle. And so it's pulled through, right? Through all the way through from this value, this mindset to, no, this is how you're going to put it. This is how you can put it into practice, right? And here's how you can experiment and explore different ways of really developing a specific skill set that we believe is most important. I think the other thing that's really interesting is that as we spent a lot of time with the ELT to decide on what the guiding principles were and the language that we use behind them, but also on the skills. And so there are hundreds of skills that you could develop. And so we were sort of like, what's our line in the sand? Like, how are we going to think about this? And so we don't think about the skills that underpin our guiding principles as static. We see them as kind of a living entity, and year over year, kind of recalibrating. Are those the right skills still that help us play to win? Or are we really good at that now? And now we need to move on to the next priority skill. And so we really focused in on what we thought were the highest priorities for us as a company to move the needle based off of that, kind of due diligence that we did with the ELT to really understand their perspective and where we were, and then put that against the employee's perspective and where they saw us, right? And kind of all the listening mechanisms that we had with our employee base. So that's kind of at the core of it. I would say the other thing about skills is that there was already an existing belief within our hiring team to use a skills-first hiring approach. And there was already an interest within the workforce planning team to use a skills-first workforce planning approach. And so there was an obvious connection there where if we're all using the same approach across our ecosystem, our ability to accelerate and become more agile is exponential. And so the power of that kind of cross-functional philosophical alignment has been differentiating for me in my career, but also I think for here at Cisco and how we think about just what we look at other companies, what other companies are doing. There isn't necessarily that level of alignment across those core functions, and there is here. And I think that has really helped us be able to move more quickly in a more unified front.
You called out something earlier that connects to this, and I just want to kind of think about the through line there, because you talked about employees whose managers are supportive of AI and use it themselves are twice as likely to adopt, right? We've been reading a lot about that. Similarly, for learning and training, if your manager is modeling that, you are more likely to be successful. Right. And I would add a third, which is what you shared, is the culture. And a culture is the collective behavior of its leaders. And so as you think about being able to operationalize that beyond the nice words on the wall, and what does it mean to walk the talk for leaders, leaders are the biggest leverage point in AI enablement, in skill enablement, and in culture. So can you share at Cisco, how do you design a program that serves 86,000 plus employees while making sure that management and leadership layer is fully activated and bought in to what you're building?
Yeah, I like to use the example of one of our flagship programs that we call AI for Everyone. And so we built AI for Everyone around personas. So we looked at what are the different profiles of individuals who are using AI. And so that spectrum goes from a non-technical to a technical learner. And so we came up with 4 personas, and we aligned those personas again with our hiring and our workforce planning function so that we're all talking the same language. And the personas were user, leader, builder, and enabler. And then we aligned skills to each one of those personas. And then we built out the learning experience based off of those skill sets. And from a leader perspective, we believe that everybody is a leader, whether you manage people or not, and that leadership starts with yourself. It starts with self-awareness, self-agency. And so we have everyone go through the user pathway first. So everyone learns how to use AI themselves, whether you lead people or not. And then the leaders go through the leader module, right? And so then they learn, okay, now I know how to use it as an everyday user. Here's how I can think about encouraging my team to use it. Here's how I can analyze my team's workflows, and I can think about my team strategy and how AI can come in and help us with our strategy. And so it kind of allows you to take it from kind of self to the next level. And then in the experience itself, you're already teaching them how to be a role model. And then we have the more technical builder enabler, of course, pathways that are extremely robust. And we also point our learners to the robust catalog that we offer externally as well through Cisco U and Networking Academy. And so we have kind of all this rich context that we can kind of Cisco on Cisco, make sure that we're, pulling in our expertise so that our entire workforce has access to that as well if they want to go really deep in those technical skills.
Yeah, and rich and robust were the words that were coming to my mind around all the things that you're talking about, both what you're building internally, but also what you're building in the consortium. And you've shared so much with us today. And I think there's going to be a massive wave of people going to look at your websites and all the information that will be in the show notes around this notion of, skills are at the core of everything and how you're drawing that through every single piece of the career experience from hire to retire. But I would like to ask one final question. Because you've seen so much and you've experienced so much in different organizations and different contexts and now at such scale, if you were to share a piece of advice with your younger self going through that kind of learning journey for your career, from instructional design to consulting to Fortune 500 L&D leader, what would you tell yourself? What piece of advice around the learning discipline would you share?
I think just embrace that things are not static. There isn't a static destination that you're trying to reach, that things are always evolving, and be open to explore kind of what's next with curiosity and courage. I think that at the core of everything that goes into my day-to-day, it can be enwrapped in courage and curiosity and really being open to exploring the unknown. With AI, we talk a lot about how it's sort of the portions of the map that are unwritten. And we have to be okay with exploring the areas that don't have a predefined map and be adaptable and resilient as you explore, and be open to the fact that you're not always going to get things right out the gate. And I think part of that, if I were going to go back to my younger self, would be definitely to embrace the progress over the perfection. I think that, a lot of, Type A personalities are like really striving to get things exactly right so that they can ship them. And you spend a lot of time and kind of personal passion putting yourself into it. And then you realize a lot of other people have really great experiences and expertise that can help you mold your idea into something better than you could have ever thought of on your own. And really just embracing that and being open to that. And so I think I've just seen a shift in my career from kind of going from that mindset to no, we're going to put something out there. We're going to get feedback. And maybe it's not going to be the feedback that we want to hear, but it will be important feedback that will make sure that our product ultimately will be what's best for the business. And so having that openness to explore, get the feedback, and, be able to take it and not take it personally, I think is really, really important.
Yeah. So what I heard and I want to take away is that curiosity, the courage to do it, and potentially the collaboration, right, is working and getting those additional experiences. So, Marci, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. You have done so much at your time at Cisco, and we look forward to following along.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.